Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Global Math Department. It is now 9 p.m. on the dot, and we are going to get started. My name is Lee Natero, and I'll be your host tonight. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Cindy Regan about, I said that wrong, Cindy Regan, about thinking, writing plus math. So would everyone please introduce themselves in the chat window, telling us what you teach, where you teach, and what your Twitter handle is, if you have one. So we have two people from Idaho tonight and North Carolina. And it looks like we have a colleague possibly.
Yes.
Cindy's, yes. And I see some familiar faces tonight. Francis, I recognize. And Casey. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please make sure if people are giving their Twitter handle that you follow them on Twitter. And feel free tonight to tweet out about this session and what you're learning at Global Math Department. So before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how these meetings work. These meetings are recorded and are available a few hours after the meeting ends. To view the recording, you would come back to the same URL you used to get here tonight. The Global Math community prides itself on being friendly and supportive. The chat room is available for topical and general conversation throughout the meeting. I'll catch your questions for the presenter, so don't worry that she won't notice it in the chatter. Our speaker tonight is Cindy Regan. Cindy is a teacher at St. Ignatius High School, an all-male Jesuit high school with over 1,500 students in the heart of Cleveland, Ohio. She teaches a problem-based SBG hybrid mix that focuses on inquiry, discussion, reflection, and metacognition. She recently received the Teacher of the Year award from her students, and she can think of no greater honor. She lives with her husband outside of Cleveland. She has 4 kids, and they have a greatest dog in the world. So I'd like to turn this over to Cindy.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks to the Global Math Department for inviting me to do this. And thanks for everybody for showing up and spending your Tuesday night with me. This is really kind of exciting who's checking in here. Big caveat as we get started here. I'm not an expert. I am a risk taker in the classroom. If there's something that I think could help my students, I'm willing to give it a try. I've had some great successes and I've had some real flops, but I am absolutely on board with trying anything. You will also know that I'm not an expert by the sheer number of slides that I'm going to have for you tonight. I read somewhere that there's only supposed to be a certain number of slides for the time period that we talk, and I'm just going to totally blow that out of the water. Part of the reason why, though, there is a method to the madness. If I'm going to talk about metacognition and writing and reflection and how it has impacted my students, I want you to see my students writing. So I want to have an opportunity to share how it has impacted them in their words. I also think that I have to give you a little bit of context. I teach at an all-male high school in Cleveland, Ohio. If you happen to be at Twitter Math Camp 2018, you might recognize this. We have over 1,500 high school students. We have students that come from about 7 different counties, and 100 different grade schools feed into us. So, we have quite the diverse backgrounds coming to see us. We have a class size of about 27. I teach 5 classes. I see my students every day for a maximum time period of 40 minutes a day. And I don't know about you, but there was a time when I would be grading assignments and I just felt like I was hitting myself in the head over and over. I would see the same mistakes and same bad habits and same repetition. And it felt like I could say things over and over and over again, and it didn't matter. Like things weren't sticking. And I was weary. I was so exhausted sometimes. And I thought, my God, if I feel this way, how much my students? Like, how is this impacting my students? I knew I wanted to give them an aha. I wanted them to experience that aha moment, and it wasn't happening. So I started researching, and I attended conferences, and I talked to people who were way smarter than I am, and I read a lot. And I realized it wasn't that I wasn't imparting knowledge, but I wasn't helping my students learn. And there was a big difference in that. What I realized was I needed to start talking about metacognition. I needed to start teaching metacognition. I had to help my students start thinking about their thinking and learning how they learn. The aha moment wasn't something I could give them. It had to originate from them. It had to be organic. It had to be internal from them in order for it to have meaning, in order for it to have significance. So I studied more and I researched more, and I reached out to people and found mentors. Carmel Scatino, she's just wonderful. And in doing all of that, I started finding out about the interconnectedness of writing and math, particularly reflective writing. And kind of by reflective writing, diving into not only what is it you're learning, but what is it you're thinking? What is it you're feeling? How does all of that become connected? And a real nice benefit of all of that, which I discovered kind of after the fact that I'm still relishing, is that learning then becomes very relational. And for me, that's very important. I really treasure that. So I went all in. And I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. I totally went all in. And I have to throw in this little caveat here. You don't have to do everything that I do in order to get the benefit of reflective writing and writing promoting metacognition. You might choose one thing, or you might be doing one thing, and this gives you an idea of how to alter it or how to add one thing into your repertoire. Or maybe you decide to do multiple things. I don't want to kind of scare you off or intimidate by everything that I do, but maybe it also might inspire. So all in. My students write all the time. We write journals. We do special writing prompts. My students, for every assessment, do corrections with reflections. We're on semesters, so every quarter they do a quarterly reflection and self-evaluation. They also do a teacher evaluation of me. I teach honors pre-calc, AP statistics. I am now this year teaching a brand new fourth year math senior class for those students who probably are not going to be taking calculus their senior year. I've also done all of this with 8th graders. Notice the grades that the students earn in my class are very closely aligned and associated with the writing that they do. In part because the writing is how they're learning. Also because, to be honest, in my environment in the school in which I teach, oftentimes students do not put a worth to something unless there is a grade with it, which is unfortunate, but it is a reality in which I live in, I experience. So there's rubrics, and I'm going to share them with you. But as you can tell, I've really integrated this into my entire pedagogy and my entire philosophy in the classroom. There's a few cautions that I have to share with you, though. And I've learned all of these the hard way. So I'm sharing them with you with the hope that you don't end up with the same stumbles that I do. In order for this to be successful, in order for you to get the benefit that you want, you have to create a culture within your class that fosters reflection and self-evaluation. That growth mindset, the idea that we learn from mistakes, if that's not there, you're not going to get the buy-in. So you really need to, in all areas of everything you do in class, foster that culture. The other thing is you have to earn as well as build relationships and trust with your students. If you are asking them to be really honest with you and be really introspective and open, you have to have that trust level. It becomes an amazing relationship that you end up having with them. And finally, this one I was really slow to the game, and that's entirely my fault. I did not communicate the purpose or the goals of writing within the math class effectively or early to parents. And I don't blame the parents. You know, why are grades coming from writing in the math class? Why is your student being asked to do all this writing in the math class? It was a stumbling block for students as well then, because if parents aren't on board and aren't on the team with you, it becomes really hard. I now, from the very beginning, communicate with parents, and I'm very active and proactive with getting everybody on the team so that everybody understands the purpose of this, and there's a lot of great buy-in. So with that in mind, I'd like to tell you how I start every one of my classes at the start of the school year to start creating this culture and start creating this environment for students. Day one, no matter what the class is, I start with a puzzle. Something that seems kind of non-mathy, so to speak. So it might be a 3-act. It might be broken circles or squares. It might be Snap Cube Hotel. Whatever it is, we do a puzzle. And then that night, they journal about it. I say, what was the first thing that went through your head? What was the first thing you thought to try in order to solve the problem? Then I ask them, did it work, and what'd you end up doing? So I want to ask you right now, when you look at these 3 questions, what was the first thing that went through your head? What was the first thing you thought to try? What did you end up doing? What do you notice about these questions? What do you think the point of these questions are specifically? So type your ideas in the chat window for a second. Yeah, see what it's like to think like a mathematician, open-ended. Yes, absolutely, very important. Low floor, aren't focused on calculations, starting the metacognitions, reflect on the process. Yeah, these are great. Okay, see, I like that. There's no way to be wrong. Looking for patterns. Yeah. And if Peg, perfect. We're starting to invite them to think about their thinking. It's more about the thought process than the kind of quote unquote math. So let's start laying that foundation for analyzing patterns, analyzing habits. So getting that into their mind, getting that into that kind of, all right, let's think about what it is I'm thinking about. We launch into day 2. Now this is for my honors pre-calc. Might do something else for other classes, but I throw a mathy question at them. They work in groups, they come up with things, we chat, we talk, and then that night, they have another journal. Same questions. But this time we're talking about math. Day 3, we do activities in class, we do work, and then that night, they have another journal. And this journal is really important for me as a teacher in that this really allows me to start communicating some ideas to them. The first question I say is, when you encounter a complex or difficult problem, what's the first thing that goes through your head? I mean, we all have that little voice inside our head. And I want them to start acknowledging that little voice so that we can maybe, in some cases, start correcting that little voice. The other thing I ask them, what'd you do next? Do you give up? Do you dive in? Be honest with yourself. And then number 3 is kind of the kicker. Do you react the same way you did faced with a puzzle as with a math problem? Why or why not? And then I ask them to write me a tweet. I go old school, 140 characters, and describe how it feels about math. Now, the goal of this is it really lays the foundation for them of very deliberate things related to metacognition that we want to be acutely aware of. But it also creates a baseline for me in where are they as a reflective writer. Some students are very, very good at introspection. It just is very natural to them. So this allows me a baseline for measuring their growth as we go forward. It's kind of interesting because I have found that the quote unquote very good math students have a really hard time describing what they're thinking about math. Oftentimes they just do it. They've never really thought about what it is they're doing. So it's really interesting who can be challenged by reflective writing. So let's go through some of the ways I use writing in my classroom. One of the ways is a weekly journal prompt. I give them a quad rule composition notebook that is only to be used for their journals. They're not to write homework in it. They're not to take notes in it. It is specifically for these weekly journals. And I ask them to choose one homework problem that they struggled with, or one homework problem that they found particularly interesting or compelling. And they're going to write a journal prompt on it. As an incentive, they find it an incentive for doing a really good job on this, they can use their journal on all their assessments. So they have to follow 5 prompts. The first prompt: what went through your mind when you encountered this problem? This student said, when I first saw the formula for the question, I was scared. Even though I had done it before, I forgot how many variables and things there were to keep track of when solving these problems. The next question is, what was your difficulty, or what were you thinking when you met the difficulty? The same student said, I had trouble with this problem because I attempted to solve it algebraically. After solving the equation, I was not really sure what the numbers meant. From here, I spiraled quickly and finished the problem very confused. Okay. This gives me tremendous insight into the student's thinking. We now go to question number 3. What helped you understand how to solve it? They said, I was able to understand the problem better by graphing. Desmos really helped me visualize the problem and solve it quicker. I learned that the vertex is the highest point, slope is the speed. Well, we'll figure out, we'll smooth that out a little bit later. And the x-intercepts are our start and finish. Okay, now the real interesting thing about this entry so far is this student had written out what they had done algebraically, where if you remember correctly, or if you remember, he said he spiraled quickly and finished the problem very confused. Thing is, he did the algebra correctly. He'd solved the problem algebraically completely correctly. But because he didn't know what the numbers meant, it had no meaning to him. He didn't have the understanding. It was the visualization of it that helped this student put it together and understand. What this allows me to do now is have a really good, rich conversation with the student about, okay, what strategies are going to help you for every problem? How can you draw a picture? This is what helped you. Let's move on from there. Let's develop this more for you. The next prompts, I ask them to show how they ended up working out. I literally want them to work through it and explain their steps. Discuss problem-solving techniques and how they connect to other topics. Again, kind of developing that internal problem solving. What was your mistake or challenge, and what did you learn from it? So here are a few responses and few examples. I love this. I love this so much because students kind of discover things on their own that every single teacher has been telling them, but until they discover it, it doesn't have meaning. So this problem, the student says, this problem helped me realize not to jump to conclusions, because you might not find a solution then. This student said, problem taught me it's important to put your final answer in the context of the problem and figure out whether or not it makes sense. Like, yes. Every teacher is going, yes. But it now has meaning for them. My students have a rubric for this. Their parents have a rubric on our learning platform. Their first probably 2 or 3 journals, I give them the opportunity for unlimited feedback, unlimited revision, and unlimited resubmissions. And then they can determine when they're ready for their final grade. This reflective writing is really a learning process. It's very, very challenging for some. So it becomes important to really scaffold for quite a few students. So with this rubric, unlike rubrics for tests or unlike rubrics for English papers, I can't compare students' writing assignments. I can't compare their journals to each other because some are coming from a very natural, introspective way, and others are going to need a lot more scaffolding to get to that same result. So those first kind of introductory journals that we talked about give me a really nice baseline against which I can measure personal growth. Which kind of leads us to the idea of how do we help students learn how to write with reflection? First of all, I never use red ink. Seems very judgy. And after I made this screen, I realized when I put it into a PDF, it looks like red ink on this paper. It's actually hot pink. You know, got to be kind of fun with things. But I ask a lot of questions. Like this comment that I wrote. This is a really interesting observation. Why do you think that was? I ask them a lot of hows, whys, what made you? Why? What did that lead you to think afterwards? Lots of prompts, very open-ended, but with the idea of where do I go from here? So early on, some of their first journals will have a lot of you on them, a lot of encouragement. And as the students develop and as their ability to reflect increases and improves, I back off. I back out. Because I really want it to be a space for them where they're inviting me in, not the other way around. So I add comments along the way periodically, but it will always be very specific or guiding feedback. And the less I impose on them as they develop their skills, the more reflective they seem to get, which I find very interesting. So those are the weekly problem journals. I also give special writing prompts. Special writing prompts I use just periodically throughout the school year. They're less formal. They tend to offer me a lot more insight, which is very interesting. And they really help build relationships with the students. These are phenomenal if you have an unexpected absence. These are great if you have a long weekend that's coming up and you can toss one to the kid. Or if somebody finishes an assessment early, have them start on one of these. Some of the answers or responses I get from these are really, really powerful. So a couple of students have responded. This one I love. I've learned the teacher is not the only resource. Oh, thank God. I love that. Another student said, I've improved because I am able to realize I'm wrong and accept that. And another student, this is just great. I started to look at every problem as a puzzle that needed to be solved. This student said, I can say that having to explain why things work the way they do instead of just copying notes and memorizing knowledge was beneficial. It also truly showed me that knowledge and understanding are not the same. Isn't that powerful? Knowledge and understanding are not the same. This student said, the journals we did helped me develop my critical thinking skills. It didn't let me just forget problems I couldn't do. I needed to learn them. The journal held me responsible for my learning. This next student that I'm going to show you on this next slide, little context to frame. He was a second semester, fourth quarter senior. He had about a month left in his high school career. He says, the class and myself have greatly improved my critical thinking and problem solving by demanding the best from myself and working on things I don't understand instead of giving up. This class pushed me to levels I didn't think I could ever reach. This achievement came as a result of being patient and never giving up on problems. The fourth quarter was one in which I saw myself become the student I always thought I could be. That last phrase just gets me. And can you imagine not only how empowering or how affirming that is to recognize that in yourself, but when you write it, it becomes real. Like, how cool is that? Take a second and look back up at the paragraph, the top paragraph here. Can you pick out the phrases in which he identifies his metacognitive thinking? See if you can add it into the chat room. Can you pick out where he identifies his metacognitive thinking? Rightly, choosing to work on what he didn't understand. What else? Yeah, good. Working on things I don't understand, being patient, never giving up on problems. Yes, Frank, demanding the best from myself. Improve my critical thinking. I love that we got this student to the point he recognized what was giving him success. He recognized what was allowing him to learn, and he can carry that with him now. This student says, I've never written so much in a math course before. I've never put my mathematical thought process on paper. Journal entries have changed the way I look at math. Each person understands math in a slightly different way. So with journal entries, I have to explain how I understand something to myself. I must draw out my process, what I learned anew, what I still don't understand, and how I approach my problems. Journals allowed me to more clearly grasp ideas. If you're able to teach something and write it down yourself, you know what you're doing. Hey, isn't that awesome? He's internalized this. The student has internalized it and can see, as I laugh, he can see the method to the madness because it was real. And it was real for him. Another way I do writing in the classroom is I do corrections and for all the assessments, and then they do reflections. They're optional. It's to help promote that growth mindset, help promote the idea of learning from mistakes. But they have to have a reflective element for each one. So they need to explain what they did wrong, reflect on what they learned about the problem, their understanding. I score each question on a 10-point scale. So if they scored a 7 or less, they also have to reflect on how did they study, what it was about the correction process that helped them have a greater understanding. And then I give points back. How many points back depends on which class, but they earn points back. It's really the reflection that I want them to do, though. I don't have many examples because I give them back, but I do have one that I just adore. Luckily, this is a very good-natured student, but this one is awesome. I asked him to reflect on what he learned about this problem, and he said, I learned that if you don't complete the... It's just so perfect. The thing is, as funny as this is, this leads to a really good discussion. This leads to a great conversation about, all right, let's reflect here. Did you really learn? And what is it that we have to really do to learn? This student was just a treat. I loved him. I have students also do quarterly reflection and self-evaluations. There's a rubric for it. I asked them to type this because I can only do so much of deciphering 150 students' handwriting. That's the weekly journal part. This gets typed, and it also doesn't involve mathematical calculations or anything that they would need and have challenges with typing. I asked them to talk about where they had the most growth, where they had the greatest weakness, their plan for improving their area of weakness, and also what about their habit of mind or learning do they want to change? The wording on part C and D is very deliberate. The reason why I write it this way or frame it this way, obviously what I'm getting at is trying to get them to set goals. But what I found in the past is if I say, give me your goals, or what are your goals? It's really challenging for some students to be either concrete or meaningful. But if I ask them, what's your plan for improving a weakness? Or what part of this do you want to change? They are, for whatever reason, able to articulate it much clearer and much better. So here's the rubric. The parents have it on our learning platform. Students have access to it. They are evaluating themselves on their small group contribution, their preparation, problem organization, problem presentation, as well as their own responsibility and attitude towards learning. I tell them very clearly, this is not a grade that reflects where you want to be, where you wish you were. This is to be honest. And in all seriousness, about 90% of my students are remarkably insightful and very honest. The other 10%, if it's way out of bounds, I just ask to have a personal conversation with them. We talk through it. I've never really had an issue where after that, we still have a big discrepancy. I want to share with you an evaluation that came from last year. I had a student. He was a senior. He was kind of like the school superstar. He, was as a sophomore committed to a D1 football program. He was just everybody loved him. Just top dog guy. And he's in my class and he's not cooperating. He's not participating. He's, he's right on that edge of making me want to go home and have an extra glass of wine at night, if you know what I mean. But in his first quarter reflection, he gave me this. The area of experience the most growth, the small group conversation. At the beginning of the quarter, I didn't participate a lot when we were trying to solve problems. I relied on my classmates because I thought they were smarter than me. I feel I'm weakest in problem presentation, and I feel this because when I go to the board, I'm not always confident my answer's correct. I do not present my answers without the fear of being wrong. He wasn't trying to be a jerk. This big superstar football player was insecure. And now I have a connection to him. And now I have a way to reach him. And now I'm not misunderstanding where he is in my classroom. This one was a senior in honors pre-calculus. He says, I believe I have this kind of mentality that I'm inferior to all those around me, especially when I found out there's a freshman in our class, which I think is kind of funny. Going forward, I'd like to stop selling myself short and having that mindset, because I really do believe that when it comes down to it, I have the skills to understand and grasp these concepts. This student had the opposite issue. One weakness that I think I've had all year, but didn't realize until this semester, is I tend to assume my work is always correct. So I find that I am sometimes overly confident in my solution. Opposite issue, but can create equal obstacles towards learning. This student is just my favorite. He says, last quarter, especially at the beginning, I felt I did the homework just to complete it. But this quarter, I've really focused on using it to learn, and I found this strategy to be very effective. I just love that. I'm like, really? Like, wow. So, isn't that awesome? Yeah. This student said, something different from this quarter from last is my participation. It's not that I'm not confident in the answer. It is just a small looming fear of being wrong or having an incomplete answer. I still try to do my best, even with that little glimmering fear of failure in the background. God, isn't that a powerful phrase? That little glimmering fear of failure. We all experience it. But he's willing to be vulnerable enough to share with me that he feels that in the classroom. This student said, I tend to skip problems I didn't understand, and I try to go back to them later or ask other people what the problem was asking. But sometimes when I did that, I would forget to go back to the problem. So when the problem was worked out in class the next day, I could see how it was worked out, but I would never have struggled with the problem. So I wouldn't have had an aha moment where I learned from my mistakes. I don't ever talk to my students about aha moments. I've never even mentioned aha moments in my class. But he's had an aha moment. And he wants it. And the student has also figured out how he gets it. They knew they had to struggle with the problem and wrestle with it. It couldn't just be presented to him. And he had to learn from his mistakes. This student says, my biggest strength this quarter has been my fearlessness when attacking problems. God, I admire that. I actually am quite jealous of that. Fearlessness when attacking problems. I'd love that. Obviously, as with anything, there's pros and cons. One of the pros is that it opens a very non-threatening, non-intimidating dialogue. I love the student. Hey, Ms. Reagan, I encourage them to have a conversation with me. Make it very safe. So here's a question for you, and I'm interested in your comments. What type of student in your experience or in your classroom right now would appreciate the safety of journaling? Yes, Jessica, I absolutely agree. Quiet ones, the introvert. Yeah. The ones who fear the board? Absolutely. Lee, good point. The ones that need more time to think. Absolutely. The ones who enjoy being reflective. You're not wrong with that, Janice. In fact, I find it interesting that I have had some of my own students say, well, I really enjoy English. I'm an English person. I like English or the humanities more than math. This allows me to kind of bridge that and bring that other world in for them. Peg, good point about those who might be on the autism scholarship autism spectrum, or those who might have some sort of language issue. I could absolutely see how this would be beneficial. And David, isn't it interesting? I think the students also have that imposter syndrome worry. Either that they're worried about failing or that people are going to find out that they're not the math person. I also find that the journal is very helpful for those who are perhaps coming from a marginalized group. This can help with some feelings of safety, feelings of security. And that can go a long way, particularly in the building of trust. As with anything, there will be some dissenters along the way. And as much as this student kind of is telling me that just about everything that I do in class is not working for him, they're still doing it in a very respectful very articulate, and very safe way. And I appreciate that. And it goes towards the safety that the journal provides. He'll be disappointed because I'm not going to change, but he still felt safe enough to share his views with me. It allows me to catch errors even after we've gone through them in class. Students may still be repeating things, and I have a chance to catch and correct them. It also allows for study guide for assessment. I mean, there's a lot of students that have trouble studying for math tests, particularly for large cumulative exams. And what I tell my students is at the end of the semester, your weekly journal prompts have now created an outline of the topics that you felt you were most challenged or weakest in, and that's where you can start from. So in that sense, it's really quite helpful for them as well. It's a good way to measure self-growth. I have forced myself to get in the habit of periodically, deliberately having the students go back. Maybe we're on journal number 14. I'll say, hey, let's go back to journal number 3. Look, compare how you're writing now to what you wrote then. How have you developed as a reflective thinker? How have you developed as a problem solver? It's a great way for them to go back and reward themselves for their growth. You get to share the aha moments with them. This Desmos has the power. This next student was an 8th grader. I love this. I tried many ways, but it wasn't in my blood. The only way I could figure this out was to ask google.com. I didn't get an answer. So I just did guess and check. And at the end, after 23 tries, I got it. I love this. First of all, look at what he wrote. There's a lot of problem solving in that. Tried to figure it out. He tried a resource. He went to guess and check. And there's a lot involved. And he was persistent 23 times. And then there's joy. I got it. Ah, I love this. And this is the only way I know. I'm sure there's many other ways, but for me personally, to foster and teach and build metacognition. This student said journal entries helped me hone my critical thinking. Not only helped me learn the math concepts, but made me examine my learning style. That's really what we need to build that metacognition. Student said, my biggest challenge this year has come from when I don't know the first step. I get frustrated and often have trouble making connections. They later said, getting rid of that mentality, I'm bad at math and I don't like math, really helped me to do better. There's cons, of course. Kids are going to grape. It takes a little bit to get buy-in. But the culture of my class is so devoted to this, buy-in almost becomes inescapable. The griping doesn't necessarily end, but it's minimal. Sometimes it's hard to read their handwriting, especially 152 teenage males. I use the graph paper composition notebooks deliberately because I want them to draw diagrams and work out problems. There's quite a bit of study to show the benefits of handwriting versus typing in promoting cognitive connections. So I am really a huge believer in having them write it out. So some of the things I have them do is I have them write in pen, because what I found is at the end of the school year, pencil smudged. I also have them only write on one side then, so we don't get bleed through. It does take a lot of time. I'm not going to lie. It definitely takes time. But the students also recognize that it takes time. I don't tell them, but they know. And they appreciate it, and it builds the relationship. So for me, the pros outweigh the cons. Hands down, not even close. I can't imagine teaching without promoting the idea of reflection and metacognition. Because I get journal entries like this. Student says, this year I have truly, truly learned to relax and trust that I know the material when it comes to test day. I relayed this in my journal a multitude of times, only because it's true. I always study enough, and I know that. Yet I'm quite an anxious kid, and I always panic when I struggle with a problem. Journals have helped me a ton. They've helped me realize that I know what I'm talking about. Math isn't that hard. And with a class of this caliber, self-confidence and a calm, collected attitude have helped me succeed, revealing to me that this sort of attitude goes for anything in life. So for next year, in football, math, and everything else, I know I'm good enough. I just have to remember to believe it. So again, I'm not an expert, but I really believe in what I'm doing. And I've surrounded myself with colleagues who are really incredible people and a really supportive family and mentors who have become friends. But because of the journaling and metacognitive writing, I'm really challenged and inspired the most by my students. And I am so empowered by them that it makes going to work just a joy. So I want to ask you, how can you use reflective writing in your class to build metacognition? What are some thoughts for you? Do you use them? What could be first steps? So, good, Frank, thank you I just caught your question. What might be the first steps? I have a blog. On the blog, I have a lot of resources. I've put a lot of books that I've used, a lot of prompts that I use, a lot of places where I get my ideas. So feel free to dive in there. And Lee, yeah, let's attack some of the questions while we still have some time.
So one of the questions was, do you ever get pushback from students who just basically refuse to hand in all the reflections or writing that you demand?
Yes. Short answer, yes.
Or how do you deal with that?
How do I deal with it? I think really what the students find is that because the grades are so tied to the writing and the reflection, they have to self-select what their grade is going to be. It puts all of the responsibility for the learning, it puts the responsibility for their growth on them. If they choose to not participate, I tell them you're kind of choosing the consequences of it too. We don't permit extra credit or bonus at our school. So by default, and I hate the idea of being tied to grades. Trust me, if I could get rid of grades, I would in a heartbeat. But it's unfortunately a carrot because it is so interwoven into my curriculum. The other thing, though, is with those particular students, I sit down and I meet with them. I make a very deliberate effort to personally talk with them, and I help them just by talking through, learn how to write. And that tends to break down a lot of the barriers as well, that personal one-on-one.
Okay. So I guess this other question that I'm looking at that somebody posted is somewhat related. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely ample evidence that your well-crafted questions are facilitating learning for these students. Do you feel all students find it beneficial, or are there some who are minimally engaged, never open up, or do you feel that they all get there by the end of the year?
I would say the vast majority get there by the end of the year. Even if they make a small amount of growth, even a small amount of growth is beneficial in this area. Because honestly, Somebody previously mentioned something about the autistic students. My son is autistic. I know for him, reflection is a big challenge. So any measure of growth there can't be anything wrong with that. So I take it on a personal level, case-by-case basis.
Looks like there's 2 other questions in the chat window too. Right there right now from Dennis and from Christopher.
So Christopher says, how did I incorporate writing in the classroom? Did I jump all in or gradually go in? Christopher, I am a glutton for punishment, and I just ripped the Band-Aid. I dove in, and that's why at the beginning I told you my cautions. I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I learned through trial and error, and I'm still learning. But yeah, I just ripped the Band-Aid. But like I said, you also don't have to do everything that I do. Janice says, do you read everything they write, and how many extra hours a day do you spend on that? I do read everything they write, but there's a trade-off. I don't collect homework. So I don't grade nightly homework at all or collect it. So this gives me the opportunity to kind of use that time reading the journals. Have I ever used reflections of the ELLs? And so it's different. No, I haven't. I don't have any within ELLs within my community or my students. So unfortunately, I can't speak to that. I'd be really interested if somebody has, if they would want to comment on that and answer that. And then Jessica says, following on Janice, to give feedback on a weekly basis, mark holistically at the end, or to give you a mark per entry. They turn in their journals, their weekly prompt question journals each week. I give feedback to them weekly. Special prompts, it's just kind of periodically, and they get a mark for every journal entry that they do. Yeah. Any other questions? Anybody have any ideas? Anything that they want to add? Everything, including a whole lot of resources, I've put in the PDF and the handout, including some places where I pull ideas from, including some places where I've been inspired to get some ideas from, if that helps. I've also have my email, Twitter handle, the blog. Feel free to reach out. I would love to hear if anybody tries some reflective writing in the classroom, what success, what obstacles, what their results are, especially if you do something that's different than what I do. I would love to hear how it works in your classroom. So thank you all for coming and spending Tuesday night with me. I really appreciated it.
All right, thank you very much, Cindy. And as Cindy mentioned, in the handouts tab, if you click on the handouts tab in the chat window, you'll see her presentation there, and you can download it. So thanks again, Cindy, for presenting tonight. Next week, we are going to be hearing from John Rowe on catalyzing a culture of curiosity in mathematics. So I hope you can join us for that. Don't forget that this presentation has been recorded, and please, 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 please share this recording with your friends. Get them to become a part of the Global Math Department, and get them to attend live if they can. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thanks, Lee.